There is absolute precedence for human beings to be fluid in gender and for them to be gender non-conforming. An Indigenous culture that has been there. Australian Aboriginals are the oldest Indigenous culture in the world. Do you know why there's so few of them? We killed them.
Yes.
We committed a genocide.
Why were we able to do that?
What I'm trying to look at, if you really look at what I'm saying, is that there are other frameworks that are perhaps more human, that are more,
what
that
makes
are
them
less.
more human?
Well, they're less driven by control, by controlling regimes
You like
or
them
controlling
more,
religions.
I get it, but I don't think that makes them more human. The argument you were making was that the Aboriginal society and other indigenous societies, as you call them, were more human because whatever reason, and they were therefore models for emulation for us.
I don't think I said more human. I said there is something fundamentally human.
You said more human. Yeah.
You're very reductive. I thought you were a lot more intellectual than this.
I think this is very revealing, but let's come back to the argument.
And welcome back to the Freefall, guys. And I don't know about you, but I am so tired of this gender conversation, the gender debate, the gender fluid, gender queer, gender. I'm just done with this whole thing. And these people do not care about us. They keep using our empathy against us. They don't care about Western values. They don't care about Western traditions. They don't care if there's a tomorrow. They do not care. This is just me, me, me. I got a right to do this and a right to do that and a right. And rights are meaningless unless you have values to anchor you in. Who gives a crap about all these rights? And it's just empty and shallow and pleasure seeking. And it's just materialistic crap. We've known that's the story of the West is that this materialist crap, it gets you nothing. It gets us nowhere. And today we've got an episode of the Triggernometry that has this Deborah Francis White. She's a feminist podcaster. She has some podcast, The Guilty Feminist. And she's a pseudo-intellectual, but she's on Triggernometry talking to Constantine. And it's entertainment. It's awesome. But we're going to be watching it together. I'll give you my reactions. Let's get into it.
There's very few things where we go, it's this or it's that. You might have heard of the American Two-Spirit people and a Native American Two-Spirit. You guys heard of that?
Yeah.
That was created like around in the 90s at a conference, an LGBTQ plus conference, when Indigenous people, Native American people were like, we have to explain it to the Westerners because they keep using, it was like a sort of slur for Indigenous queer people that was often used. And they said, right, they see it as this and that. So let's say we're two. So whenever you hear that third gender in Indigenous spaces, it's not really, that's done through a Western framework of two and therefore a third. But if you talk to people in Indigenous cultures, it's like it's not a third for us because it's more like a piano scale. So if that is in Indigenous cultures, it seems unlikely that there are no people in the West who also fit somewhere up and down this gender scale.
All right, yeah, so we can just stop right there for just a second. So she's basically making an appeal to authority here. She's saying that because Indigenous people believed this, therefore it must be true. When we know that they had a diverse set of beliefs, there was a bunch of different kinds of Indigenous people, but overall they believed all kinds of wacky stuff. That the weather was caused by some kind of god creatures or animals, or that illness was caused by spirits or demons or witchcraft. Like maybe you killed a bear, so now you got diarrhea, or maybe that's why your hair's falling out because you stepped on a squirrel or that kind of thing. And they hadn't developed the wheel for transport. They didn't know how to do a lot of things. They thought that people originated in America. The list could go forever. They had a lot of savage practices and stuff as well. They weren't the most tolerant of people. Like the Comanche and things were pretty brutal. So. They had, and there was a wide spectrum of beliefs there, but to look to the most primitive people that we can and say that we're going to use these values for society today. I mean, isn't that kind of self-defeating? I mean, we want to move back to the most primitive people that we can, and that's going to advance us into the future. I really don't understand exactly where she's going with this.
And I think what's happened in the West is the legal framework is you've got to say you're male or you've got to say you're female, and that's it. So if I have to be in one of these boxes in order to get any rights, this is the one I belong in because that's the one that feels more like me. But if you take it back to its kind of human roots, We're so obsessed with our own frameworks and we really do think there's no truth outside them. But one of the lenses I'm looking at this through is I'm adopted. I was given away at birth. In any other time before now, I would have been an orphan. Oliver Twist had one living parent. It doesn't necessarily mean both your parents are dead. It means no one in your family can or will look after you. Orphan rights is a fantastic, something I've written about in the book. If you look at orphan rights, it's absolutely fascinating. Orphans were massive scapegoats in Victorian times. If you adopt one, it will infect your children with immorality. They're not a natural child. Their mothers were immoral and poor, and they will be too. And so if you were lucky enough to be adopted in Victorian times, you were Jane Eyre. So you had to say Mr. and Mrs. Reed. You didn't call them mum and dad. And so if I had been adopted even some decades earlier, I couldn't have said mum and dad, and I wouldn't have thought of my brother and sister as my brother and sister. I would have been constantly told I was a charity case, I was a waif, I was a stray, I was a bastard, I was an orphan. And my parents would have been my guardians and I would have been their ward legally. And if my mum and dad had gone around saying to people, this is our daughter, and people had found out I was adopted, they would have thought they were fantasists or liars, because you can't argue with biology. Now, at some point, society just decided that because orphans had such terrible low self-esteem, and 70% of the criminal population in the UK in Victorian times were orphans, and because of stories like Jane Eyre and Oliver Twist, social activism and all that, just decided that children like me should be fully endorsed. And so we did argue with biology, and we won. And that is why I have self-esteem and have had a good education and feel completely endorsed by society.
You know, it's really interesting, the time and place that people pick, a bit of her history to tell the narrative they're trying to spin. She picked that for a reason. She picked orphans and people being put up for adoption and not being, allowed to, kind of nurturing them to become, individuals like everybody else, and that there was something special about them like there is everybody else. Lots of advancements have been made. Not that I'm, way into the self-esteem movement myself. I think that, people that walk around that aren't worth a crap, that never do anything of value, going, I'm perfect the way I am, and I was born me, and I'm just great, and I can fly one day, and I can, sit on a rainbow. That's not wonderful, and it is a serious problem that we have today. We have some of the worst people in society being pushed on everyone all the time. Isn't this culture great? Isn't this culture great? No, it sucks, but we're having to deal with it. But I think that, she does make a good point there, but she's trying to say that they outdid biology, with this, that biology didn't win in the end, that society kind of, took over. But it's not 100% true. Yeah, the way that people look at people, the stereotypes and that have kind of been, lowered quite a bit. But you can't escape your genetics. I mean, a lot of the people that get put up for adoption and things, they do have bad outcomes. And she would say it's 100% because of what society does, which does play an element. But another large part of it is that if you have parents who made poor decisions into adulthood that led to a child that had to be put up for adoption by their poor decisions, the genetic chance that you are going to make poor decisions into adulthood is skyrocketed compared to if your parents made good decisions. I mean, genetics play a part. I mean, it's obvious. We've known this for 30, 40 years longer. This has been proven time and time again. But genetics isn't everything, but it tells you the game you're going to play. It's kind of like we're playing chess. You're not going to bring out a twister map and start doing, the splits. That we're playing chess. These are the moves you can make. With these genetics, you're not going to be 7'2". Your hair's going to be this color. The rules are set. There's a lot of moves you could make on the board. I mean, chess. It's an astronomical amount of moves you can make. But you're not going to start playing Monopoly and all that kind of thing. We know what we're playing here. So she's wrong. She's wrong about that. And, she could have just as easily started the narrative from, well, who came up with adoption and where did these values come from, that we should take care of everyone and there's something special about everybody. And, you can follow those, those values and traditions back to the West very, very easily.
And then you can parallel that with gay rights. If you look at the history of gay rights, in the 60s, many gay men were broken. Mm-hmm. You watch something like The Boys in the Band, which is a play and it's been made into a movie about gay men in the 60s in New York. and how miserable they were and how much self-loathing there was and how they kind of went for each other, because there were two options. One was be in the closet, be married, come and get hand jobs under the bridge. The other was be out and be giving the hand jobs under the bridge. And that was it. And so the misery those men lived with, and the suicide rate and the mental health breakdowns, and we've seen what's happened since we've endorsed and legalized and for gay men who now live in our society freely, and women, but it's easy to see with gay men because of criminalization and decriminalization. And so many, your and my gay friends now will be, running the PTA and, living their lives on the outside and being their full selves and not living in depression and marginalization. This doesn't mean there's no homophobia, but it means the legalization and the endorsing of language has functionally changed who is capable of being productive, happy, whole members of society.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is kind of a social landmine, and it's really an adult conversation that I don't know if we're really willing to have or think about, but I will say it's worth thinking about the values that built the West and made this the greatest place to live that everybody wants to come to, that was thriving, and you could basically live in peace with a white house with a white picket fence and not have to worry about being murdered, and the high trust society and all these things that we had, was that people died and sacrificed themselves for the good of and the future of their culture and society. And today we have people that are sacrificing the good and the future of their culture and society for themselves. And that is by definition, that is degeneration, and we're heading more and more in that direction. And it's also useful to ask yourself, can something be really useful and good for an individual, but it's really bad and useless for society?
What would happen if we realized that our model is not the only model? There is absolute precedence for human beings to be fluid in gender and for them to be gender non-conforming. Just as much with orphans, Indigenous societies don't have the concept of orphan, because the whole community will look after you and your aunt is also your mum type feel. And so it's a Western framework that delivers us orphans.
Is she really trying to lay the fact that there's unwanted children and children without parents at the feet and the doorstep of the West? The West. That one of our founding principles, one of the keys to why the West was so successful and why it could do everything that it did, why it was so far advanced, was that we had monogamous principles and values. These other indigenous people never got that far. They were still stuck on impulse. Do what feels good all the time. When you get married, it wasn't because you could just sit around and feel good. It had nothing to do with anything. It was for sacrificing today for tomorrow. What makes us different than animals is that we can sacrifice today for the future. And that's what monogamy was about. It wasn't so you could just sit around and stick it somewhere all the time. That had nothing to do with it. We know there's a literature on this. Monogamous families have better outcomes for children, period. Yes, there's crappy monogamous parents. Yes, there's parents who are single parents and polyamory, whatever the fuck, that turn out okay. But on average, it's not even close. And you can look at the people today that practice this kind of shit, their children, the outcomes, and the outcomes of the stable, strong family, it's not even close. So there's a lot of things that you can paint and try to throw on the West. The better outcomes for kids, get the hell out of here.
Yeah,
do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean, but I don't agree. And the reason is that I'm not a Western person by birth, and Francis has experiences of outside. And the idea that male and female are Western categories is just not. It's not true. In fact, I would.
Not just Western, but you see what I mean about indigenous societies.
Yes, but indigenous societies are like 0.0001% of the entire population of human beings on the planet. And the more east you go, the more the traditional societies are, and the more the male and female rigidity is enforced, actually. The West is actually pretty loose about them. The other thing that I don't understand about the argument is that it sounds to me like we're confusing gender non-conformity, in other words, a feminine man or a man who doesn't comply with the stereotypes of what we expect of a man, and a woman who doesn't comply and wears trousers or whatever, with claiming that you are the opposite sex. These are completely separate things. And the third thing is, and we've obviously had a lot of people on the show to talk about this, the gay rights model doesn't work very well as a comparison, not least because it's actually gay people that are at the forefront of opposing trans ideology and say, if I had been alive today as a young person, people would have told me I'm trans, even though I'm gay, or even though I'm autistic, or even though I'm this. And the fourth difference is that decriminalizing homosexuality was about preventing the ill treatment of gay people. When we're talking about transgenderism, the way that we've been talking about it in our societies until recently, until West Streeting banned puberty blockers, is that because we have this ideology of compassion for people who may feel differently, we then would prescribe very significant medical treatments to young children who are not actually capable of making rational decisions about their long-term future. So for all of those reasons, I don't really see the argument that you're making. In the idea that the male-female binary is a Western concept is just not factually accurate.
Okay, so stop there.
Yeah.
I'm talking about indigenous people who lived all over the world.
Yeah.
Until we had. So when you say the trouble with saying it's not Western is colonization did bring a lot of more fixed ideas. So I'm from
hold on a second. Sorry, no, I'm not going to let that pass. Are you saying people in the Duchy of Muscovy 2,000 years ago?
No. But I only just started the sentence. So I said, for example, colonization did export a lot of very Christian, quote unquote Christian, not necessarily Christian ideals around the world. So my example was, I think it's hard to talk about the whole globe, but my example was in Australia. You may know Australian Aboriginals have the idea of brother boys and sister girls, and they are genderqueer people. But of course, when, let's be honest, white Christian colonizers came and turned up, they said that's not a thing and you're not allowed to do that, and said that that's wrong, and there was a lot of shaming that's gone on. Now that obviously has infiltrated into the Aboriginal population now.
Look, I have no problem with Aborigines, but I don't look to them for moral and societal guidance either. And there's a few reasons. One, they have one of the lowest IQs on average of any group we ever interacted with, sub 70. The U.S. military, which did lots of research on this, they won't take anybody with an IQ less than 85 because they found there's not even a single job they can give you that you don't just make worse. So why are we going to deal with somebody like that on average? It's only going to make your problems worse. And, for two, she's picking and choosing. She's like, I like that these Aborigines did this thing, but I'm not going to look at the other things that they did, like cannibalism. And, if you broke a law, they would break your bones and stick you to the ground, burn you, torture you, mutilate you. They did where if there was like a competing tribe, they'd steal the women and, impregnate them against their will. And, they believed in sorcery and magic. Come on, guys. It's intellectually dishonest. And nobody's saying that the West is perfect. That has nothing to do with anything, but it's the most perfect system, especially compared to this. This is crazy.
There's still brother boys and there's still sister girls, but there's a lot of homophobia in the Aboriginal population that didn't exist before it was imposed.
But you're not addressing my argument. My argument is not that there aren't indigenous communities where these practices exist. My argument is that is by far and away a tiny minority of the global population of humans.
I don't really understand how that matters, though, because it's still the archaic way people behave.
If 99% of people do something and 0.1% of people do something different.
Do you know why indigenous populations are so small, though? Isn't it?
The point I'm trying to make to you is...
Do you know why they're so small?
Hold on a second.
Do you know why they're so small?
You're deflecting from the argument that I'm making.
Really?
Yes, you are. The argument that I made to you is when you said this is a Western concept, I gave you examples.
Yeah.
For example, the Duchy of Muscovy or Russia 600 years ago.
So when I say Western, I'm speaking because that's where I'm having the arguments, is in the West.
Okay.
Now, obviously, there are Eastern places too, but I'm talking about Western frameworks. It's unlikely I'm going to come in here in Kent and start talking about, Far Eastern concepts.
I think you're mishearing what I'm saying. You made the claim that outside of the West, in indigenous societies, these things are very normal. And the point I'm making to you is, while it may be the case in certain tiny communities that exist... Hold on a second. That exist in certain tiny communities, bless you, Francis, outside of the West, There are also lots of other civilizations outside of the West where the gender binary that you were talking about as a Western concept is actually much more firmly enforced than it is in the West. In the Islamic civilization, in the Chinese civilization, in Russia, all over the world, in pretty much everywhere. So bringing up tiny indigenous communities does not prove the case.
Okay, but indigenous communities tend to be, I think, it's more archaic. It's more what it was before we brought in all these religious frameworks. You're still talking about the Muslim world. You're still talking about an Abrahamic framework.
Okay, what about the Chinese?
I don't know. I haven't looked into the Chinese.
And I don't get where this line of thinking comes from. Like, did she see Avatar too many times and she was just picturing these people as, being tied into the planet by their hair and they're just like singing a song and they're in touch with the universe? That is not how these people were. They were just like everybody. They had good, evil, like that saying by Alexander Solzhenitsyn that, evil runs down the heart of every man. That's a really good way to look at things. I'm sure they had lots of evil things they did too, but we look at these people like they were these, what's the fallacy of the noble savage fallacy or whatever? She's completely, complicit in that. And, Constantine is really a smart guy here, and he's doing a great job pushing her feet to the fire. I'm not the biggest on the appeal to the majority, fallacy or whatever, where it's like, 99% of people can be wrong about something. I mean, look at Nazi Germany. They were doing, most people, even your average day person, was perfectly okay with what was going on. So, the majority of people can be wrong, and I think we all know that. But she just has it in her head for whatever reason. There's this mind virus, like Elon talks about. There's this mind virus that whatever tears down traditions is good. She can't even give a reason. If you haven't put the thought in to why the tradition was there in the first place, well, maybe you shouldn't tear the fucking thing down.
I think what I'm trying to look at, if you really look at what I'm saying, is that there are other frameworks that are perhaps more human, that are more,
what
that are
makes
less
them more human?
Well, they're less driven by control, by controlling regimes
you like
or
them
controlling
more,
religions.
I get it, but I don't think that makes them more human. If 99% of humans do A, it seems to me that A is more human.
You must know. You're a bright man.
I am.
You
thank
must know. You must know. You're a public intellectual. You must know that 99%, given the recent population boom of people under draconian governments, under draconian binary religious ideals, doesn't dwarf an indigenous culture that has been there. Australian Aboriginals are the oldest indigenous culture in the world. Do you know why there's so few of them? We killed them.
Yes.
We committed a genocide.
Why were we able to do that?
And there it is, boys. And she's going to absolutely hate this. I've seen this before. She's going to say that this is white supremacy and European colonialism. It's not, though. He's just saying that there's a system that works better than another system. And there's this postmodernist belief out there. And postmodernism has a grain of truth. That's why it's so dangerous. But what postmodernism says is that there's an infinite way of interpreting the world. There's an infinite, you can think whatever you want. It's infinite. The sky is green. Well, maybe it's green for you. But the problem is that it's a half-truth. There is an infinite way you can interpret things, but there's a very limited ways of useful and true ways of interpreting the world. If you have this set of beliefs, it's not going to do you as good as this set of beliefs. And I mean, at some point, she's going to have to deal with it. We're all going to have to deal with this, guys. If there's this system works better than this system, and there is a man and a woman, and that is a reality. It's more useful. It's more true than the other system where you're saying, well, we're all infinite. It's on a spectrum, and there's actually 8 billion sexes, and it's just crazy.
Why were we able to do that?
What are you implying?
I'm just asking you the question.
Are you implying because we're better?
No.
What are you implying?
We were technologically far more advanced. That's what I'm implying. What's not clear about that?
So you're saying...
I'm saying we were technologically more advanced. Would you
So you're
disagree
saying we're
with that?
superior to Australian Aboriginals?
That's quite the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm not saying we were superior. I'm saying we were technologically more advanced.
So how is that the opposite?
Superior implies a moral quality. I'm not making any moral implication. You seem to be, but
Okay.
what I'm saying is...
I think most people would hear it that way.
No,
Again, you're a very intelligent man. How would most people hear that?
most people would hear what I'm saying for what I'm saying, which is...
Don't think they would.
As somebody who my mother's South America, and I have indigenous heritage, I don't see it that way. A lot of my grandmother's ancestors were wiped out by the conquistadors, whether it's by they came in, executed them, or it was disease brought in by conquistadors.
Yeah. So
I don't interpret it that way, if I'm being honest.
So what's the point of this question then?
The point of this question is
because we came in with our better gendered binaries,
sorry.
and therefore we were
Deborah,
able to
this
kill
is going
them.
to work a lot better if you just hear the point I'm making instead of
I
getting...
really cannot understand what it could possibly be other than we are better.
well, let me explain it to you what it could possibly be. And
What's it got to do with the gender binary?
your argument, we're just talking about the argument, and you seem to get quite heated about this, which is completely unnecessary. You think it's necessary?
I'm a bit stunned by what you're implying.
No, you're acting in a kind of passive-aggressive way, which indicates that you're not happy
I genuinely am being 100% authentic. My visceral reaction to a white man sitting and saying to me, and why were we able to commit genocide on them? And then just pausing.
Yes.
And I love this because she is just shocked. I mean, she has this ideology that we've allowed to creep in, this mind virus, has been able to stand unchallenged for so long that even a minor pushback, he's just asking a couple questions and it all disintegrates. You know, she would be quick to dismiss anything with the West. She just dismisses it all out of hand. But he just puts a little pressure on the Aborigine way of life, and that maybe we shouldn't just be, you know, adopting this willy-nilly. And she's like, why? You're trying to say that the West is better and superior? But at the same time, she's done nothing but talking crap about the West and saying that the Aborigines were superior the whole time. Nobody said morally superior. We're talking about systems here. Which system works better? Which values work better? Which is more true? And it's just falling apart.
First of all, it's interesting that you brought up my skin color, because I thought that was the exact opposite of the point you're trying to make in the book. But anyway, let's come back to the argument.
You haven't read my book, so you wouldn't know what the point is.
You said that the point of your book is it's all about you can't say this as this person and whatever. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
You're very reductive. I thought you were a lot more intellectual than this.
I think this is very revealing, but let's come back to the argument. The argument you were making was that the Aboriginal society and other indigenous societies, as you call them, were more human because whatever reason, and they were therefore models for emulation for us.
I don't think I said more human. I said there is something fundamentally human.
You said more human. Yeah.
There's something fundamentally of how humans are before there's a whole heap of religious imposition and a whole heap of totalitarian imposition. That's what I'm saying. I think we can learn a lot from indigenous societies.
It's interesting how uncomfortable she gets when he starts bringing up that she was saying that one group was more human than another. You know, we don't like, you know, there's some historical times you can go back to where people were considered subhuman that don't look so good. And now, you know, she's doing the exact same thing she's trying to accuse him of. So I love that. And, you know, and there are behaviors that are more human and less animal-like. I mean, like I said earlier, part of what makes you a human is your ability to sacrifice today for tomorrow, to look into the future for, you know, how is this going to affect other people in society? Is this going to be a good place for my kids and their kids? And we seem to have completely lost that now. And the more that you act on impulse is more animalistic, when you're acting on impulse and emotion rather than, you know, your higher faculties and, you know, tradition and, you know, and that's just, it's a lot of the problem that we have today. And, you know, like masculinity not being that voice that's drawing the line in the sand, like we're not going any further in this direction. And, you know, there's always a bit of arbitrariness, and that's how they get you. They're like, why'd you draw a line here? Why not an inch sooner? Why not an inch later? Like, what's so bad about this? And it's like, well, you have to draw a line somewhere, because I don't want to end up 5 miles down the road here saying, how did I get here? And that's kind of what we're dealing with in the West. We're like, how did we get to this place now where everything is falling apart? And it's people like this lady here, and it's this mind virus and postmodernism and the lack of masculinity. We're getting attacked we're surrounded by all sides, by cultures and people that hate us. And we're the suicidal empathy. We hate ourselves even. It's disgusting. And I really hope that we can bring this back, guys. But I appreciate you guys watching another video with me. I've got a lot more videos coming on the way. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. I'd like to know what you guys think. And I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.